Good evening. I'm Allison Schilling, Senior Program Officer here at the Concord Museum. Thank you all for joining us tonight, both those here with us in the Janet and Churchill Franklin Lyceum and those watching the live stream from home. It's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Ben Shattuck, who is joining us to talk about his new book, 6 Walks in the Footsteps of Henry David Thoreau. Ben is an artist, writer, and general store owner. He's a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop, and for his writing has received numerous awards, including a Pushcart Prize and a PEN America Award. Ben has been granted prestigious art and writing residencies that have taken him from the gates of the Arctic National Park in Alaska, a residency which he described as awful, but in a good way. Norway, where he studied under painter Odd Nerdrum, Middlebury, Vermont, where he received a scholarship in fiction for the Breadloaf Writers Conference, and throughout New York, Massachusetts, and Maine for residencies that I'm sure are quite impressive, but I'm unduly glossing over for the sake of time. Ben's paintings have been exhibited in galleries in New York, Boston, Williamstown, and Westport, as well as the New Bedford Art Museum. He lives with his wife and daughter on the coast of Massachusetts. In his blurb for 6 Walks, Bill McKibben wrote, "I think Thoreau would have liked this book, and that's a high recommendation." Here in Concord, we tend to think highly of Thoreau's likes or things he would have liked. So it's truly a delight to have Ben here and here with us to talk about 6 journeys inspired by Thoreau's walks. In a town where we constantly and often, not realizing, trace and intersect with innumerable walks that Thoreau has taken, Ben's book, and I'm sure this evening's talk, will show us, as Nina McLaughlin wrote, "We're putting one foot in front of the other it can take us." Tonight's forum will be a conversation between Ben and our museum director, Tom Putnam, and will include a few short readings from 6 Walks. After the forum, Ben will be signing copies of the new book, which is for sale this evening thanks to our partnership with the Concord Bookshop. I hope you all enjoy the forum, and it doesn't even cross your mind to describe it as awful, even if it's in the good way. So please join me in welcoming Ben.
Thank you so much for that beautifully composed introduction. I'm on a month-and-a-half-long book tour, so you get all sorts of really interesting intros, and my name pronounced a lot of interesting ways. This morning, I was giving a talk to my Quaker-based elementary school. I challenge any of you to discuss transcendentalism to a first grader. It was my most intimidating audience by far to hold their attention. But thanks so much for inviting me to this extremely beautiful museum in this extremely important place in Thoreau's life. Here is what will happen. I'm going to read. It'll be only 6 minutes. And then we'll talk, and I'll read again. Both of these readings are from the first section of the book. It is divided into very consumable segments, 6 segments with interludes in between. This one comes from my first walk on Cape Cod. The only thing you need to know about this book about this excerpt is that I started my walk, we can talk about this later, why I went on this awful in a good way journey, from a bad case of insomnia, and just started walking from Cape Cod's elbow to fingertip. It's about 20 miles through the sand. So I had just woken up from a very bad dream. And what else? That's it for this section that you need to know. When Henry started this walk at age 32 in 1849, he wore a broad-brimmed hat designed with a miniature shelf to hold flowers he found. He dressed in an earthen-toned three-piece suit and always carried his spyglass for birdwatching. His knapsack was rigged with a compartment for his books, one for pressing flowers, his sewing materials, his fishing line, and a handful of fishing hooks. He walked with an umbrella tilted over his shoulder to keep the sand and wind off his neck, and a special walking stick doubling as a ruler that he used to measure plants. He took a goose quill pen with which he wrote in luxurious horizontal flourishes, his wise look wind-blown and the crosses of his T's like distant hills. He packed a salt for seasoning, sugar and tea, and a, quote, junk of heavy cake with plums. He was a sinewy, exercised country saunterer, handsomely dressed and carrying with him all the items for misadventure like a flowery battleship. Whereas I, standing on the Nauset dunes and staring out to the open palm of the Atlantic Ocean, looked as if I just disembarked a red-eye and had a deep misunderstanding of the current season. The cold May morning wind seized my legs, exposed beneath a bathing suit, but I was sweating from the waist up under 2 shirts, a sweater, a rain jacket, and winter hat. Henry wore special boots that he slathered with paraffin. My running shoes were held together in the front with duct tape. The sand wore away this tape in the first mile before filleting the soles of the shoes halfway off, and so I tied the shoes to my backpack, which meant that in the next couple days, the dozens of miles of sand would need blisters between my toes on the very uppermost part of my arch, and weirdly, on the tops of my big toes. But the worst was the sun. I hadn't packed any sunscreen, and because summer in New England comes like a gunshot after winter, my calves would go from ice white to red by the time I stumbled up to a stranger's house in Wellfleet many hours later, knocking on the door and hoping to find a place to sleep because, as it turned out, I'd also forgotten a sleeping bag in my rush to escape my own bed. The beach is a vast morgue, Henry wrote, where famished dogs may range in packs and crows come daily to glean the pittance which the tide leaves them. You usually come to the seashore to spend the day with the broad wings of sand flanking your sides and the fan of ocean in front. Beaches aren't known or loved for hiking because, I soon realized, they offered a monotonous, unchanging landscape. On my left, for miles, 100 feet of red sand and clay peeking into a salt-killed rim of bayberry, huckleberry, and the odd scrub pine wherein the song sparrow trilled the famous first notes of Beethoven's Fifth. To my right, the flat sea, profound at first but unremarkable thereafter, and so my eyes fell to the ground, to this vast morgue, to see the items at the ocean that had returned to shore that morning. Beaches do have a tang of fate. The smooth stones, the ring stones, the tired driftwood, the dead loon crook-necked and constellated in white dots on black feathers. They seem there for a reason. The Legos, the cow femur, the wooden chair propped upright and facing out to sea, 3 pennies whose Lincolns had worn to blurry portraits, a nickel reduced to the size and thinness of a dime, a Red Sox hat, a Patriots hat, fish vertebrae, and a giant bullet shell whose tip had filigreed to metal lacework. I walked for over an hour before I saw another person, a bird watcher, with his telescope set up in the middle of the beach. We talked dead loons, northern gannets, and which shorebirds were migrating. Even with the long pauses of strangers meeting, I was happy for the distraction, as it momentarily halted the conveyor belt of sadness that the dream from last night was moving through me. I'd rather dream of the bizarre ships sent from my subconscious, the ones floating on waves of anxiety and fear, dreams of 2-headed snakes, those of my teeth going soft, or of my house filled with small, sharp-toothed rodents. I'd rather the puzzles, these images to be interpreted, distanced by a measure of analysis and rephrased for the day. But what I'd gotten the previous night was different. It was a real person, put in material textures of my everyday life. It was an experience, more like a memory. Not a puzzle floating on anything, just a cold dunk in the sea itself. And that's why I was clinging now to the birder, thrashing at him with questions about the migratory routes of loons. The birdwatcher, clearly wanting to end the conversation, wished me well, folded up his telescope, and left to find some shorebird he was searching for. I sat in the sand, and to distract myself, took out my journal and wrote synonyms for the wind. Cloud river, weather's yeast, seasoned trader, colonial fuel. It was a word game I assigned to my freshman college students one day years earlier when I'd finished teaching the lesson plan but had 15 minutes before the class period ended. Look out the window, I'd said, and write the longest list of synonyms you can find for anything out there. Sitting at my desk 10 minutes later, listening to the students read their lists aloud, I was unexpectedly moved, entranced maybe. This renaming of nature, these many words for an oak tree or the clouds or the sky or the Iowa River, sounded like prayers to me, like worship. I think everyone in the classroom felt it, because we all entered the silence you feel in a church or theater. The spell was broken when a boy started his list with worm shit. Dirt, I said. The earth, he said. Hurricane muscle, I wrote of the wind. Summer's respite, crying scapegoat. Thank you. This book is a 2-for-1 deal. It comes with drawings. So this is a drawing I made of the wooden chair in the middle of the beach in Wellfleet. And I have a really funny story about a cell phone. Don't feel bad. Marilyn Robinson, who you probably all know, was reading and a cell phone was going off in the audience and she said, "I'll wait," in that sort of like wonderful way she has. And then it went and she started reading and it went off again. And she said, "I'll wait." And a third time. And then she started laughing and she goes, "Oh my, I think that's my phone." There it is.
Good. Well, thank you so much for the reading, and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So I thought before we get to the nightmares and insomnia, it might be fun actually for people just to know a little bit more about who you were before you got to writing this book. Where'd you grow up, and how'd you become a writer? Not just a little thumbnail sketch of your early life.
Yeah. I still identify as a painter. My dad is an artist, and we grew up on the south coast of Massachusetts, right in the armpit of Cape Cod, as I described. And so my house was always filled with paintings and writing and books, and being an artist first was kind of like being the butcher's son and working. It's just what I felt most comfortable doing. And I went to the Quaker-based elementary school, and then off to Cornell University, where I really got involved with birds in the Cornell Lab for Ornithology, and I'm really excited about going up. And I spent years working as an intern at research stations, Arctic terns and common eiders, and I was on a job in the Carmel Valley in California, helping out with the Western Bluebird Project, and just happened to stop by a publishing house that I really admired, started working there, and like all the best things in life, got completely derailed from what I was actually doing, and got involved with writing, editing, and then applied to the Iowa Writers Workshop. I got in, and so then that started the writing career in very serious and quick order.
I don't think this is in the book, but it may have been. But do you remember, so you're well-educated, reading Thoreau in high school or college, and did he...
Oh, I hated him so much in high school. God, I don't know I don't want to offend anybody, but I will say I think there should be another word for lazy, but it's not great curriculum building, I think, to assign a 15-year-old on civil disobedience. It is just not right, because and I don't know if I'm jumping the gun here, but I came to love Thoreau and really stand behind saying that he's one of the best we have, and his writing it's a treasure. I mean, it is coming through his journals and seeing what just the raw observational power and whatever happened in his life, his childhood, his intelligence, his experience, his really beautiful way of understanding the world and connecting it to our own lives, the natural world and our relationships. It was like a light went on, way after college. Yeah.
I should skip ahead because my next question is about the journals. But before I get there, I love this. Also, again, when you were a younger person, and as someone who works here at a history museum, I was struck by the passage in which you talk about being a Civil War reenactor. And I'll quote, you write, "The past is a verb I found that summer. Its feeling comes through participation, not standing in front of a monument." So tell us about your experience as a Civil War reenactor and why it makes its way.
Here's the secret about Civil War reenacting. The most exciting part is when you're not doing the fighting reenacting. The most exciting part for me was when you're in Virginia, everybody, you're hot from the day, the wool clothing, the buttons get hot from the sun. It's evening, all the tourists have gone away. There's fire smoke rising from the middle of a sea of canvas tents. You can hear a fiddle being tuned somewhere. It's like an active, it's in it's in like the margins of reenacting where you really feel that chill of something coming alive, that, oh my gosh, we are, with a little less technology, we are just moments away from inhabiting something in the past, and you really can touch it. So I think I wrote that passage when I was standing in front of the oysterman's house, which is where Henry David Thoreau stayed on one of his walks through Cape Cod. And I stood there, I guess as you would in front of a monument, in front of a physical thing, to try to glean some understanding or reverence or acceptance in whatever way you want to understand that. And I felt nothing at all. And I think if I've learned anything from reading Henry David Thoreau's journals and understanding the life of this person, is like, you've just got to be truthful all the time about what you're seeing and how you feel about what you're seeing. And so that's when that phrase came, where it's like, I could have drummed up some line about this feeling significant, but it just didn't at all. So with Civil War reenacting, and I guess why I connected that back to Civil War reenacting was like, these monuments, when you're at Gettysburg, or the past isn't a noun or an object that you stare at. The past is something that you inhabit. And I think if you're not going to, walk 20 miles through the sand or get in a Civil War uniform and spend a few days camping with a few thousand strangers, the other way to do that is by reading. I think your mind can take you to places in the past. Yeah.
So why don't you tell the story about how you rediscovered the journals of Henry David Thoreau and what was going on in your life at that time?
It's a really specific story, and sorry if a few folks in here have already read the book. It's in there. It's late in there. I don't know if everybody remembers, in 2017 or 18, it was one of the coldest winters we had in Massachusetts. It was a 100-year freeze, and I was putting boats away for the winter, and I was carrying a boat, had my hands right like this on the gunwale, and I slipped and fell, and the boat came down to my hands, and as a nurse described, my fingertip was exploded off. And it never, in the book signings, I'll show you But which is interesting in its own way, because I lost my handwriting, and this is my painting hand, and it was this whole thing. Anyway, I got home from the hospital on a lot of painkillers, and if you've ever had a hangnail, imagine that times 10,000. So I couldn't pay attention to reading a novel. I couldn't watch TV because it gave me a headache. My parents don't have internet, God bless them, and so there's nothing to do. And I looked on my bedside table, and there was a book that my dad had given me, which was Henry David Thoreau Selected Journals, 1837-61, for Christmas. This was January. And I picked it up, and I opened up a random page, and I read what I thought was the most beautiful description of a field covered in snow I had ever read. And then I flipped to another page at random, and I read the most sort of warm, personal description of listening to a cricket on a late September night. And I thought, oh my God, I thought, oh, I've read the two best lines in the book, and then opened again, it just kept happening. I thought, this is a brick of gold. This is a very special person who has a very special perspective of the world and chooses to observe it in these full sentences. I'd always associated journaling with like phrases, not these full sentences with ballast of metaphor and just real significance. So that's how it all started. So then through that spring, I was living at home. I had the hand injury because I couldn't cut an onion by myself or put on my socks. I had horrible insomnia, and after reading that journal, those collected journals from Damien Searles, the editor, I bought a lot of Thoreau's books, and I started reading Cape Cod. And I woke up in the morning, and the book begins like this. I was standing in the shower with these images of horrible, anxiety-filled dream. And I really did see, maybe it's because I'm a visual person and an artist, and my whole life has been trying to translate visual material. I really did see an image of a young man standing alone at the beach in sort of this expanse of freedom and happiness. And it clearly was the Thoreau from Cape Cod, and I just wanted to, as I say in the book, try on somebody else's habits for a while. So that's how it all started.
Just as an aside, and from your reading, I knew a few of those details, but I didn't know that he walked under an umbrella. It's a little hard, actually, to get my head around the idea of him walking under an umbrella.
Yeah, well, this book really came along accidentally. And so I was very happy to have it go through a fact-checking process at the publishing house. And there are some facts that are like, oh, hey, it is a bold statement. Mm-hmm. But yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, he certainly probably did not carry that to the Maine woods, but on the Cape Cod.
So tell the audience a little bit more about the genesis of the book, because when you go on that walk, you're not thinking, oh, I'm going to go on this walk and I'm going to write a book about it. So when did you start? Did you keep a journal when you did those walks? And and then I think you wrote some of them as essays first. And then so anyway, tell us about the genesis of the book.
Yeah, this book, it's an overused word, but it really did come about organically. I had been working on short stories and a novel for years, and I was taking these walks, and because I'm an artist and a writer, my reflex is to record what I see. I'd never journaled or brought a sketchbook, but I thought it would feel good to do that for a little bit. So I looked back at all these notes, and the great thing about nonfiction writing is you don't have to make anything up. I mean, those descriptions of wind were descriptions of wind that I wrote down at the time, and then you can put them back into the text and add. The great thing about nonfiction, I think, the nonfiction I've written is like it can bear a lot of what's a better word for flowery prose? It can bear a lot of weight for description. It's like sometimes fiction, you're imagining the story, so you want the prose to be a little sleeker. Nonfiction, it is just me walking on a beach in Cape Cod. So it allows for a lot of description and a lot of thought and half revelations to grow. So I looked at all this journal material, and I thought, like to write this down and put it together. And so I sort of like swept up the pieces and wrote them and sent it to The Common, which is Amherst's literary magazine. And they published that. And it, made a little ripple. And that ripple reached an editor. And that's how it all started. It's the second half of the book, which I acknowledge is intentional. But through the first walks, which are Cape Cod, Wachusett, and then...
Katahdin.
Wow. Okay, I have a 16-month-old daughter, and I was up at 5:30 this morning. Okay, in Katahdin. Those I just was doing it because I wanted to follow Thoreau. What I will say, and I hope I'm not taking too long.
No. What we came
about
here.
following Thoreau and about reenacting is that in a reenacting experience, what I really didn't want from this book, and I put in the beginning by defining the word footstep, and I was taken by this, footstep, a step taken by a person in walking, especially as heard by another person, and that sort of echo of hearing something. I didn't want to reenact anything about Thoreau. There is no getting close to that. But with reenacting, you're trying to get outside your present self, present relationships, present whatever, and inhabit something else for a while. With these walks, it really felt like, and I have said this before, it felt like somebody from a long time ago was just at my shoulder, very gently but firmly whispering what I should be doing. And it was allowing me to see the colors of my present more vividly. It just walk the beach, and then really look at the beach. Really look at how the wind is moving through the grass. And it felt like a magnifying glass in my present self, instead of civil reenacting was, you're trying to get out of it. You're trying to get out of the present moment. Yeah.
There was a slightly light moment where you're actually mistaken as a Thoreau reenact, or
right
as
down the
Thoreau
road.
himself.
Yeah.
So recount that story. So.
Yeah, I'd never been to Walden Pond, and I had also the pig pile of issues that I had very bad Lyme disease that summer too. I knew when I was standing in my living room and I couldn't tell my right hand from my left hand, and I had brain fog, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. And then was just on a lot of antibiotics. I went to Walden Pond then, and I sat in the replica cabin, and had a beard, scragglier than this, and I dressed like I do. I didn't really dress up for this event. This is just what I wear. I just happen to like, cotton linen clothing, and it might look a little old-fashioned, I suppose. And I was sitting in the chair, hollow-eyed, looking at the ground, and some woman walked in and said to her little boy, "Oh, look, there he is." I just looked up slowly and just said, "No." I knew exactly what she was talking about, and I got up and sort of walked around, and she was looking at me like waiting for me to say something about beans or huckleberry picking, and I didn't. And her son actually was about to ask me a question. It seemed like. Anyway, there's a thought for for Walden. Maybe they should hire somebody to sit in there. Anyway, it was really embarrassing.
Why don't you tell us just a little bit about the Katahdin, where you were and how you decided to just hike up the mountain?
I was in Maine already, and the Katahdin section. So each of these sections, they're not just about the walks. They each capture a theme in my own life, I would say. And the Katahdin section is really about going to the edge of something. This is, Thoreau never made it to the top of Katahdin in the Maine woods in that book. And so it felt like the edge of wilderness. I was about to become a father too, and it felt like an edge of my own life experience. One, a folding of one, an opening of another, and there is maybe not a more Katahdin is very different now than it was in the 1800s. When I got to the top, there were 3 people talking on FaceTime to their families back home. There's just like, a steady stream of camp students going up the mountain, incredibly young. There's like marked paths, there's everything. I mean, this is a place where Thoreau talks about fearing the gods. There was no God-fearing up there. There was like only Facebook loving. So that section is maybe the one where I started to really think about the edges also of the horizon and what Thoreau couldn't see in technology, or how far we could really penetrate the wilderness that he thought would stay untouched, and really how far you could get into it and what could be ruined. I think the thesis phrase in there, if there were one, would be, I say, something like, I wonder in 150 years if this will change so slowly that I won't recognize it as ruin, but only change. Because things, when they change very slowly and they're ruined very slowly, they can just seem like progress or small steps. Anyway, what I will also say about that Katahdin section, I'm on my own little campaign about redefining wilderness, is that if you are in the New England wilderness, you cannot ignore people. People are a part of the landscape now, and I think the more we incorporate what that means for a landscape, the more we will enjoy that landscape. I think if anybody, you can use this for a job or a relationship or a vacation. Nothing makes an experience worse than pretending it's not as bad as it is. Just say what it is. And if there are a ton of people hiking up Katahdin, then name that, and really see what you can pull from that. Because just overhearing conversations on the top of this mountain was one of the greatest joys. There were like all these mini dramas happening on top of this mountain. And it's like people are a part of this landscape. We can't just fly off to Glacier National Park and say that's wilderness. Something that I also understood about Thoreau really early on in reading his journals is like, he's a master of scale. His wilderness is like this. It's like a butterfly landing on milkweed. It's like the sound of a piece of ice breaking. It's just like so small and so accessible to us right now. That you're on Katahdin, you can be looking at a beautiful piece of lichen and also listen to a crazy fight between a couple, and it's like, I love all of this. Yeah.
I mentioned to you, so I hike Katahdin. Most of my hiking with my son has been in the White Mountains, and I'm from Maine. I realized I had never hiked Katahdin, so we did it in the fall. But I've learned, he's a very easygoing person, but he hates getting to the, I like to get to the top and have my lunch.
Yeah.
He hates all the people. So he refused,
Wow.
He let me get to the summit and have my picture taken, and then we find a quiet spot where he likes to have his lunch, which is the way he likes to do it.
That's an enlightened
So
person. Yeah,
I don't know.
That's right. That's
I give
what we should
myself,
be doing.
one time we did it where he goes getting all gruff or whatever. Anyway, I realized as a father, I just have to kind of go with how my son wants to do it.
I think, that is really smart. And I do think the way we interact with nature doesn't have to be, everybody should have their own idea of what happens there. I think not going up to the summit is a great one.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that he's chosen to do.
Yeah.
There's one kind of dark moment and a little, almost a biographical moment, something that I learned about Thoreau. So you write, when he walked, this is a quote from your book, when he walked Wachusett, it was 6 months after his brother died. Was he doing the same thing I was doing, walking to husk the dead skin of grief? And I don't want to ask you about that, but I was intrigued by your observation that his Native American Penobscot guide in Maine partly served as his escort because he had lost his brother.
Yeah.
Maybe disappeared, or maybe he had died, and the guide wanted to partly go on the walk to ask people if they had seen his brother. But I'll let you pick up the story from there about your observation about how Thoreau writes about that.
Oh, wow, this is a hot question.
I said it's the one dark moment, but this is history, we should face it.
Let's face it. Okay, so Joe Polis is a Penobscot guide that goes with Thoreau up to the Maine woods. Thoreau's cousin, George, I think is his first name, introduces Thoreau to Joe. Joe says to George, "What have you done with my brother? He didn't come back," which is really strange. I mean, something like that, strange wording. And why I actually understood how I drew that connection to, oh, here are two men, and we all know this if you came to this museum. Right? Thoreau died very young, he was 44. Before people's brothers should pass away, why doesn't Thoreau ever mention this again? It's sort of odd. Like, here's somebody who has the exact same experience, probably life-altering experience of losing a brother really young. And why I say this is a hot question is I also noticed as I was, for all of Henry David Thoreau's defense of indigenous rights, the writing, the very specific personal writing about Joe Polis is undeniably through a racist lens. The language is really clear. And when I wrote about this, I wanted people to come to the conclusion as I did. I didn't want to say Henry David Thoreau is a racist. So I wrote the paragraphs, I transcribed how he wrote about Joe Polis and connected that back to how he was blind to his own personal, had this connection that they really were so alike, but that there was something that Thoreau couldn't get through that I really think has to do with how he exotified or saw Joe through a racial lens. You could read it in the book, but everything from saying that Joe's thoughts are like puffs of smoke compared to white man's sharp intelligence, to Joe's descriptions of Penobscot origin stories that Henry just makes fun of, to this moment that is really sweet. Henry goes up to the Allagash with his friend Edward, and the three of them, it's raining, and the three of them are huddled beneath one canvas tent, and Joe, out of nowhere, as the rain sort of pattering down on the tent, starts singing them almost a lullaby, like a very sweet song to the three of them. And Henry sort of mocks it, and in racist terms. And it's like, oh, this is so interesting to see how sometimes you can be, everybody's complicated. You can really stand for the right cause, but also you have blinders on in some way, and how that restricts his own life, that he can't see how beautiful the song is. He can't connect to another human who's had the same experience. And it really is one of those lessons while I was reading Maine Woods, where I saw how these prejudices can really inhibit your own life and can bring you down in ways that you don't know.
Okay, switching back to something a little more fun. How about his discovery of bioluminescent fungus? Talk about that.
Yeah, so this is the one passage from college that I remember and I absolutely loved. He is out, he gets up in the middle of the night, I guess maybe to relieve himself, and he sees what he thinks is a glowing disc, or a glowing oval, and it is, as far as I can tell, bioluminescent fungus between the the bark and the hardwood of a tree, and it's tilted on the side, so it looks like truly just like a fairy's crown or something to the side, and he brings it back to camp, and he's so excited. And I use this moment to describe, I feel like this is Henry David Thoreau's, one of his greatest moments, because so much of his writing is so enthusiastic and dear about nature that he's saying to everybody, just like, look at this, look how beautiful this is. And he brings it all the way back to camp, and then the next morning, there's no color, of course. And it was just this ephemeral moment for him by himself in the Maine woods. And that's also a section I call the Allagash, Nature Reveals 1,000 Revelations, or something like that, which is a quote from Henry David Thoreau. And it's about his envy of Penobscot, or indigenous tribes, seeing so much magic out there that he just misses because he can't. He's not out there witnessing it at all times. So the bioluminescent wood is one of them. That's also, as you said, no, you didn't see the Nathaniel Philbrick interview.
I
with
didn't
me?
watch the whole thing. I watched the beginning.
So I did it. Nat Philbrick and I did a talk last week, and he said, "Ben, tell me about the aliens in the Allagash," which is that section of the book is when I bring up Thoreau's comment about fires hovering above the trees in northern Maine, and where he went was also the site of a famous alien abduction in the 1970s. So,
Alleged alien abduction.
well,
I'm going to have you do your final reading, but I just thought this is almost a throwaway question. But you're a very talented writer, but what is it like? And it has to be intimidating to put your words on a page opposite Henry David Thoreau's. What was that like?
not at all, because everything he writes is better. It's just like, I didn't think that much about the writing of, God, that sounds like false modesty. I really didn't. I really just wrote what I thought was the most truthful, descriptive sentence about the thing that I was seeing or about the experience that I had. And I try to quote Thoreau a lot. I'm not trying to like elbow him out of anything. But I understand the question you're asking. And I think I would say that if this book does anything, as when you publish a book, it's like, what do you want it to do? Do you want a good review? Do you want like to sell a lot of copy? Like, what is it that you want? I think my greatest desire is to have this book be placed in a lineage of the transcendentalists and of Henry David Thoreau's writing. I really feel that we all have inherited this thing that happened right in this area in the mid-1800s, and it affects us every day in ways that we don't really understand even or acknowledge. And this book is just like it's like a nod and and gratitude to everything that they put together and put down. And so I think it wasn't intimidating because it's like, I don't want that gift, that offering of Emerson and Thoreau to go unanswered. This is kind of like my answer to the really gorgeous thoughts they had about divinity and nature and individuality and equality of rights. And it's inspiring, and it deserves to be acknowledged in whatever 250 pages.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's a lovely way to end. Why don't you do a reading, and you can either do it here or there, whichever you prefer.
I'd be happy
we'll
to
take
do.
a couple of your questions.
Can everybody hear me? Yeah. So this is from the Wachusett section. And maybe I should say this. If it's officially called Mount Wachusett, but if you grew up in Massachusetts in the 90s, everybody called it Wachusett Mountain. So that's what I call it. There's a couple things to know about this section. It's only 7 minutes long. At the end, I name a lot of the people who I met along the way. I also mention a hypnotist. So to rid my dreams, I went to a hypnotist, and the hypnotist told me that under a swan, I would be relieved, which was weird to me at the time, but you'll see why it's not so weird. And then the final thing is that I went up to Wachusett on a lot of MDMA, which is a, for everybody knows, it's a drug, also called ecstasy. And I thought it would be a fun experiment to try to short circuit a connection to nature by taking a drug. But that didn't really work out, as you'll see. Okay, so in this scene, this is the end of the first section. In this scene, I am talking to a bird watcher who comes to Wachusett every day. Also, I don't think it's in here, but Thoreau has the most beautiful quote about taking ether. Can I just read that? So he did when his teeth were pulled, and this is what he says, because I was like, looking for Thoreau's own drug experiences. And he said, by taking the ether the other day, I was convinced how far asunder a man could be separated from his senses. You expand like a seed in the ground. You exist in your roots like a tree in winter. If you have any inclination to travel, take ether, and you go beyond the farthest star. So that's what I'm saying. Like, it was all better than anything I was writing. Like, what the heck is that? That's incredible. You exist in the roots. Okay. Talking to the bird watcher. I told Paul that he'd love Massachusetts, as if he hadn't already lived here. I then told him I had to leave, and I wandered off the lookout, paused, and turned to wave goodbye to him and the other bird watcher, and then I meandered off the summit to the top of the chairlift. The metal chair, it was a big four-seater, creaked in the wind. I walked up the off-ramp people usually ski down. Sitting on the chair, I watched a porcupine amble from the tree's foot, part the grass with its brambly body, and eat a yellow flower. These bristly young fellows, Henry wrote of the porcupine, are a very suitable small fruit of such an unkempt wilderness. I heard barking and turned to see a man pulling a black and brown blotted mutt by a leash. The dog, smelling the porcupine, reared up. Behind the man, 2 boys came running down from the summit and circled in front of the dog. The boys must have been 10 or 11, each holding a stick, their boots and socks and shins mud-splattered. Careful, I called to the man. There's a porcupine here. Whoa, he yelled to the dog, yanking him back. The boys kept running, pounding up the ramp. Where? One of the boys asked me. I pointed down the hill. They crept forward and sat on the wooden boards beside the chair. The 3 of us watched the porcupine graze. One of the boys sat with both legs drawn up to his chest, arms hugging his dirty shins. The other sat cross-legged, enraptured. I've never seen a porcupine, one of the boys said, so quietly he nearly whispered it. The dog let out a long howl. The father dug his heels into the ground. The boys knew it was bad if the dog got to the porcupine, but were also, I think, interested in the possibility of it, by the fact that something violent and painful might happen at any moment. And so there was this tension, the dog pulling on the leash, the porcupine softly licking up the stem of a flower, easy in its armor, and between those 2 animals, these boys, wanting perhaps for the dog to break away from their father, waiting to see what would happen when the dog's face punched the porcupine. The sound of the chair's crooked metal arms squeaking on the metal cable named the tension of this moment as a train whistle in Millinocket had named the solitude of that wilderness. Let's go, the father yelled to the boys. One boy left immediately, rushing toward the father, who was already pulling the dog down the slope. The other boy stayed by the chairlift for a moment. Again, he said to himself, for who else could he be speaking to? I've never seen a porcupine. He might think about this evening from time to time of the porcupine eating flowers, an animal of such rarity that it casts the landscape in the impossibility that really anything could walk from the woods. I imagined him older, maybe 20 years from now, driving home from work around here, seeing a porcupine on the road. He might stop the car and watch it slowly cross. He might think back to now, to this moment when he'd first seen one, how he'd been sitting on a chairlift overlooking a meadowy ski slope, how he'd been on a walk with his brother and his dad and their dog. He might remember me vaguely, a stranger also looking at the porcupine. This memory might give him the sensation of his childhood floating back to him, as my own childhood comes to me whenever I smell skunk cabbage, which grew on the roadside stream bed where my best friend and I used to play. 20 years from now, this boy might tell somebody about the first time he saw a porcupine and about seeing one then. He might not, out of the hesitation that comes with strong memories from early childhood. How they always sound smaller, softer, less than the personality crafting forms that they really are. The boy then stood to run after his father and brother and dog. There's a heart inside that animal, my mind told me, watching the porcupines move down the slope back to the edge of the forest, maybe the size of a chestnut. There's a heart at the center of all animals, I thought. Everything is soft underneath. A very suitable soft, small fruit, Henry wrote. And after sunset, I watched the stars. The warm air shook the oak leaves overhead. I'd taken off my shoes and put my legs inside my sleeping bag. The uneven ground is an old bed that I really love. The dreams had been visiting me less now, 4 months after Cape Cod, maybe once or twice a week, and then they seemed not to matter much now. The stars, the one between the channel of silhouetted oak canopies, must be a constellation, I thought. Unlike Henry, I didn't know the names of any constellations except the Big Dipper and Orion. I had my phone, though, with the constellation app on it. I first saw the Southern Cross through the earth. Then replicated digital stars washed through my screen as I lifted it overhead. I pointed the phone to the brightest ones. A figure then appeared, drawn by the connecting star points. The caption below read, "The Swan." What to do with something so fateful that coincidence doesn't seem like a fair word? What to do with a hypnotist's prediction that only under a swan would I feel at home? The star at the heart of the swan is one of the brightest stars in the night sky, I read on the phone screen. It is exactly 200 times larger than our own sun. Before sleeping on Wachusett Mountain, Henry also looked up at the stars and also found comfort. Quote, "It was a satisfaction to know that they were our fellow travelers still, as high and out of reach as our own destiny. Truly the stars were given for consolation." Henry walked to Wachusett, had sat up on the summit and looked at the stars as if they were given for consolation 6 months after his brother died. Was he doing the same thing I was doing, walking to husk the dead skin of grief, looking up to feel the comfort of one's own smallness in the world, to displace bulging selfhood under the shadow of such urgent beauty as the night sky, to force loss and confusion microscopic in your perspective? I spread myself on the snowless hill, and I heard in my drug-slippery head, "I've never seen a porcupine." It came like a chant, "I've never seen a porcupine." I wondered then if the porcupine was asleep, and what dreams she might be having, and if the boy was asleep, and his family dog, and my parents, and Mary and Dora, and the goldfish atop Wachusett Mountain, and Randy and Pat in Wellfleet. What weird worlds they were all inhabiting in their dreams, tortured or hopeful or anxious or in love, but all completely alone. And then I saw it, that a large portion of the world just then was simply held in their imaginations. Billions of animals suspended in hallucinations, in some place between memory and thought, these hours named sleep, this necessary dark territory that we enter alone, is a more startling spell than I can describe. Thank you.
So we have time for a couple of questions, if there are any. There's one in the back there. Wait for the microphone, just for the people who are online.
Hello. You have some really beautiful little bits all over. Like there's so many poetic bits that you like the moon constellated with white dots and like the sun candying the sea pink. And I was curious about your your process. So like, is that directly from your journal? Do you just think in poetry and put it down, or is there like the process of turning your journals into the book or the story? Like how iterative was it, and how do you think about taking one and turning it into another? Like, is there a narrative you're infusing with it, or like, how does that work?
No, it is real. The journals that I wrote are very bare, and then the translation is into. I don't know. I guess that's like the whatever great mystery of the muse or whatever it is. Like that's that wellspring of like, I didn't rewrite those sentences. That just seemed like the best description that I could give that. Like there is, I think I write in Wellfleet about how the clouds on the still pond seem like pottery glaze, and it just like, I don't know if it's because I grew up around paintings and I've been trained as an artist, as a painter, but the world just comes to me in images that then language gets put on top of. And so, there wasn't a whole lot of editing and reworking, unlike fiction writing, which is this hellish, laborious process of like, oh my God, this dialogue sounds like aliens, and this plot doesn't make any sense to any human being, and whatever it is. But yeah, that's what I say. It was such a joy to write this book, because I don't know, I think it's really Darwinian in some way. Like, this book was only written because I took the walks, was experiencing a bad time in my life, wanted to get away from the type of fiction writing that I thought was important. It just like there was a lightness in this writing project that only happened because it happened. You know, at that moment, I could have never proposed writing this book. And I think, like the beautiful lines, it was just like a playground. Like, oh, I don't care if this book goes nowhere. I want to write these sometimes like over the top adjectives for what I think this looks like. Yeah.
Before I go to the next question, I jotted that same phrase down. The blush of sunlight candied the sea pink. It's a lovely
Great.
Line. Another question right here.
Hi, Ben. Thanks for
Hi.
all you do and who you are. I have a long question and a short question. You can answer either one. You're raised on a farm. Your father's an artist. Your mother is artistic and started at a museum. And you have a world of friends. And you,
I love this question.
as a painter, you're a noticer, an observer. You choose and select paints. You create a vision, and you execute the vision. As a writer, it sounds like you're getting away from life when you go out to write, but you also have a toolkit. You choose words, you select them, and it's a creative process. You started a store, and that hasn't come up. And I'm wondering what motivated you to start a store. Did you envision the store and was creating a store and filling it out and serving customers the same fulfillment as writing? The short question is, you got to know Thoreau better than the rest of us. Is he a pretty good guy? Does he have a sense of humor? Would you hang out with him if he were a contemporary? These
are two very good questions. I'll answer them in the order you asked very quickly. The store, thank you for that plug. Duval's General Store is the oldest general store in America, 1793. It's a full quarter century, started before Thoreau was even born. It's in South Dartmouth, Massachusetts. It's where my grandmother used to go when she was a girl. Our family's been in the town for a while. I had been living in Holland for 2.5 years before I moved back to the States. And I noticed in Dutch cities, everybody was meeting after work at a Dutch pub, or there's little markets, and I was like, where is this? Like, nobody goes to church anymore, really. The theaters, nobody, I mean, there's no third space. There's work and there's home, and that's it. And I thought, the New England General Store. And so my brother and I made an offer to our friends, the former owners, and they accepted the offer, and we got a liquor license, and I started a bookstore, so you can have a pint of Guinness and pick up a book, and there's a green grocer. It's like, most of our groceries come from a 10-mile radius. I don't know if any of you travel South Coast, Westport, Dartmouth, Marion, Mattapoisett. Like, there's amazing organic farms throughout that area, and so we just collected everybody and put it together. Now the store has, 15 employees, and it's kind of running itself. It almost killed me when I started it. It was the hardest thing I've done, starting what it was essentially a 19th century mall. And yeah, so it was that. It was, let's create a meeting place, a space where you could go and pick up some local beats, sit down for a beer, and just linger for a little bit and run into a friend. My dad, he's always there. His studio is right down the way, so he's the living example of that. Anyway, the second question was about
Thoreau and whether you'd hang out with him.
Thoreau and whether I'd hang out with him. I'm not the first one to say this. We often think of Thoreau as having three identities, right? He's the hermit, the political activist, and the writer-artist. Those often don't play well together in our contemporary lens. How can you be a hermit and in the center of political activism? How can you do all, but there is, for anybody, an academic, just a lover of Thoreau's books. Maybe if you're in Concord and walk through, you will inevitably discover this wonderful fourth identity, which is this like millennial goofball who loved to do little tricks on skates. He's a great ice skater, or who was beloved. But well, we were just talking about this. Okay, can I answer that right after this? Because I do want to answer that. Who was beloved by Emerson's kids, who just seemed to be full of contradictions and a living art installation that had no easy placard, And he, so yes. Well, here's what I will say too. If you write a book about Thoreau, inevitably somebody will come to you and say, wasn't he a hard moralist who came down and he did insult a lot of people in his books. I mean, just his line about what he says of people in Provincetown about their rough intelligence. He's not nice a lot of the time, but he's so smart, and he really cares. And I think, if anything, maybe especially in this climate, you don't always agree with what somebody's saying. If they really care about something and have a lot of information, they're going to be interesting to talk to. Yeah, so there's that. The laundry. I was doing an event, I was doing an event with Rebecca Solnit, who is the preeminent feminist scholar, writer of our time, who is a great Thoreau fan. And I was saying, the other thing that happens when you write a book about Thoreau is people say, didn't his mom do his laundry? And not to put you on the spot, but she says that is an apocryphal story and there's no evidence that she did his laundry. And as we discussed, the by far the most reasonable launderers of the time were the people that Thoreau family employed. So they were not doing their own laundry all the time, and certainly Thoreau was not going back to do that. But also it is the discussion about Thoreau and the identities that he has and how people have used him as a touchstone for so many topics is an interesting thing itself. And never has a writer been so maligned for having dinner with his family, And it's why is that? That's actually really interesting. We want this person to be one thing, and when he's not, we get a little cross. And it's you think Baldwin or Gertrude Stein, you know what I mean? All these, do you think they did their own laundry? What? I guess it's because of the hermitish feeling, but he's really taken it pretty hard for having dinner with his family and really loving his sisters and hanging out with them a lot and everything. I don't know, he seems pretty nice.
There's one question over here. Does someone still have that question? No. Yeah, you were.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation tonight, Ben. Terrific. There was something in that last passage you were reading, the introspection, the poetry of it, that made me think a little bit of some of Jack Kerouac, especially in On the Road. And I'm wondering if that's a book that you've read in your life and
Never
what you
read
think
it.
of it. Never read it.
Never read it. I never read it because I think I didn't relate to the people who loved it. Yeah. Sorry.
Could be Six Walks, the sequel.
Six Walks, the
You
sequel.
can follow
The Seventh Walk, Kerouac. Yeah.
I wanted
But
to end with a quote
yeah.
from the book, walking through the dark forest, you might eventually look up through the trees, see that the sky above is the same sky over the sunny pasture, that it is one canopy of light spread over your whole life's landscape. Grief and joy are in the same life, but it's only in the forest you notice the shafts of sunlight spilling through. So thank you, Ben, for this wonderful book, for being here this evening, for the shafts of sunlight that you have shared with us this evening.
Thank you. This has been so nice. And thank you, everyone, for your interest.